I am Lauren, 31 years old, and the last time I trusted my family, I was standing in my own kitchen watching my mother rearrange my cabinets like she owned the place. She looked up at me with that practiced expression she had worn my entire life, the one that said I was the problem for simply existing, and said the words I had been hearing in different forms since childhood. You have never contributed anything to this family. This house belongs to all of us. You just happen to live here. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the keypad, and dialed 3 numbers while she was still mid-sentence. If you are watching this and you have ever had someone try to take the one thing you built with your own hands, stay with me. Because what happened next changed everything. Growing up in Columbus, Ohio, my family looked fine from the outside. My father, Dennis, managed a regional distribution warehouse. He was the kind of man who shook hands too firmly and laughed too loudly at his own jokes. My mother, Patricia, kept the house in a particular state of controlled chaos that she called clean and worked part-time at a medical billing office. Then there was my older sister, Amanda, 4 years my senior, who existed in our household the way a favorite painting exists in a museum. Admired constantly, touched carefully, protected from any harsh light. I was not the painting, I was the wall it hung on. From the time I was old enough to notice the difference, I understood that Amanda's choices were celebrated and mine were questioned. When Amanda made the volleyball team with mediocre effort, my parents drove 90 minutes to every away game. When I won a regional award for a website I built at 15 for a local animal shelter, my father glanced at the certificate and set it on the kitchen counter next to the mail. Amanda announced she was going to study marketing at Ohio State, and my parents opened the bottle of wine. I announced I wanted to study computer science with a focus on user experience design, and my mother asked if that was really a real career or just something I had seen on a YouTube video. The person who never made me feel like a question mark was my Uncle Ray. My mother's younger brother lived about 40 minutes north of us in a wide, wood-framed house he had bought at 26 with money he saved working construction. Ray had built things with his hands his entire life. Furniture, additions onto houses, a full back deck he showed me proudly every time I visited. He had never married, never had children, and had a particular way of talking to me that made me feel like my thoughts were worth finishing out loud. Every other weekend through middle school and most of high school, I would ride my bike to the bus stop and take the 40-minute route to Ray's house. He taught me to rewire old lamps, to understand why a structure needed a load-bearing wall, to take things apart and put them back together better than before. Lauren, he told me once while we were sanding down an old dresser he planned to refinish, the people who underestimate you are doing you a favor. They will never see you coming. He also told me something else. One late August evening on his back porch the summer before I left for college. Never let anyone else's name be on something you built. Own your work. Own your space. I held on to those words harder than anything my parents ever said to me. The fight about college came at dinner in October of my senior year. I had applied to 3 state schools with strong CS programs and 1 private school on a long-shot scholarship. I was not asking my parents to pay for all of it. I had saved almost $11,000 from 3 years of part-time work and the few paid web projects I had landed through a local small business network. I just needed them to acknowledge it was real. My father put down his fork and told me that tech was oversaturated and that I should consider something more practical, like going into business administration alongside Amanda. My mother agreed and added that I was being dramatic about my so-called talent. Amanda watched from across the table with an expression I had grown used to. The one where she knew better than to speak and chose to stay quiet because the silence worked in her favor. I enrolled in Ohio State's CS program that fall. I paid my way with savings, a part-time job at a campus computer lab, and a grant I found by spending 3 evenings a week in the financial aid office asking questions until someone pointed me toward the right forms. My parents came to exactly 0 events in 4 years. When I graduated with a 3.7 GPA and a job offer from a mid-sized tech consulting firm in Cleveland, my father sent a text that said, "Congrats." My mother called to ask if the job included health insurance. Uncle Ray drove 4 hours round trip to watch me walk across the stage. He brought flowers, which he clearly felt self-conscious about carrying, and took me out for a steak dinner afterward. He asked me 3 questions about the job and actually listened to all 3 answers. The next 4 years were good in the quiet, solid way that good things are when you build them yourself. I moved to Cleveland, shared an apartment with a coworker named Tessa, and did the work. I was not the flashiest designer on the team, but I was reliable and I learned fast. By 27, I was leading UX projects for mid-level clients. By 28, I was being brought into pitches. My contact with my parents and Amanda had reduced to holidays and the occasional Sunday call that felt more like a performance review of choices I had made without their input. Amanda had married young, divorced quietly, and moved back home in her late 20s. Something my parents never mentioned to me directly, but that filtered back through an aunt's comment at Thanksgiving. I noticed that when I visited, Amanda occupied a slightly diminished version of her former glory, still favored, just now for different reasons. Then, 2 days before my 29th birthday, Uncle Ray had a stroke. He survived. But the stroke was significant enough that he spent 6 weeks in rehab and came home with a left side that did not work the way it used to. I took 2 weeks off and drove to Columbus, staying in his house and coordinating with his physical therapist, his neighbor Dale, and the home health aide his insurance covered 3 days a week. My parents visited once during that 2 weeks, stayed for 90 minutes, and left before dinner. Ray recovered most of his function over the following year, but the experience had changed things. He was slower. He sold the workshop equipment he knew he would never use again. And one Thursday afternoon when I came down for a visit, he asked me to sit with him at the kitchen table while his lawyer, a quiet man named Gerald Marsh, walked through some updated paperwork. Ray looked at me across the table and said, in the same level voice he used for everything, "I want you to know what will happen to this house when I am gone. I want to be sure you hear it from me directly, not from a letter after the fact." The house and its contents were to come to me. A small account would go to a local trade apprenticeship program Ray had donated to for years. My mother would receive some personal items she had mentioned wanting, nothing else. I told him I did not want to talk about this. He told me we were talking about it anyway. The next 18 months were among the most productive of my adult life. Ray continued to recover. I got a significant raise. Tessa moved out and I found a smaller place closer to work that cost less and felt more mine. I was not wealthy, but I was stable in the way that felt earned rather than given. Then my firm lost 2 major contracts in the same quarter. Restructuring, the email said, 20% of staff. My name was on the list. I had 4 months of savings. I immediately freelanced, reaching out to every contact I had built over 6 years. Some work came in, not enough. The Cleveland apartment was expensive and the freelance income was unpredictable. By month 3, I had burned through most of my buffer and was looking at a real problem. I called my parents, not because I expected much, because Ray had taught me to try every load-bearing option before deciding a wall needed to come down. My mother answered on the second ring. I explained the situation clearly. I was not asking to move in. I was asking for a short-term loan, $3,000 to bridge 2 months while I found steady work. I had already had 2 promising interviews. I promised to pay it back with interest and put it in writing. My mother went quiet. Then she called my father to the phone. "Dennis," my father said, using his own name as if it were a credential. "Lauren, we have been helping Amanda get back on her feet since her divorce. We are stretched right now. You know how it is." I did know how it was. How it always had been. I thanked them for their time and ended the call. I subletted my apartment to a grad student, moved what I could into a 10 by 10 storage unit and drove to Columbus, not to my parents' house, to Ray's. He opened the door before I even knocked. He had seen my car from the window and did not say anything for a moment. Then he stepped aside and said, "Your room is the second on the left. Always has been." I lived with Ray for 4 months. In that time, I found a remote contract position with a firm in Austin, rebuilt my portfolio, and landed 2 ongoing clients who wanted consistent UX work. Ray and I ate dinner together almost every night. We watched old westerns on the cable channel he refused to cancel. I fixed 3 things around the house that he could no longer manage easily, and learned from watching him that dignity was not about what you had, but about how you moved through what you did not have. The week I signed a full-time remote offer at a salary better than my last job, Ray sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "I knew you would find your way. You always do. The ones who have to fight for everything end up knowing what everything is worth. I moved into my own apartment in Columbus 6 months later. Smaller than Cleveland, but mine. I kept the remote position and slowly, carefully, started saving again with the kind of intentionality that only comes from having lost your footing once and knowing exactly how the ground felt. 2 years after moving out of Ray's house, I got the call from Dale, his neighbor. Ray had passed quietly in his sleep. His heart, the doctor said. He had not been in pain. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the coffee shop where I had taken the call and cried for 40 minutes. Not the polite, controlled crying I had learned as a child, the real kind. The funeral arrangements fell largely to me since Gerald Marsh, the lawyer, had my contact information as primary. My parents came. Amanda came. They wore appropriate expressions and said appropriate things. My mother hugged me at the reception in a way that felt like she was practicing. During the reading of the will, my mother's expression moved through a sequence I recognized. Neutral. Then calculating. Then something harder underneath. Amanda looked at her phone once, quickly. Then put it away. My father stared at a point above Gerald's head for the entire reading. The house and contents came to me exactly as Ray had told me it would. My mother received a cedar chest and 2 paintings she had admired. There was a brief, icy silence in Gerald's office after the reading, and then my father said, in a very careful voice, that Ray had not been entirely himself in his final years. Gerald looked at him over the rim of his glasses and said that Mr. Carding. Ray Callahan had updated his will 18 months before his passing and had been assessed by his physician within that same window, and that if they had questions, they were welcome to contact him in writing. My mother cried in the parking lot. I could not tell if it was grief or frustration, and I had reached the point in my life where I was no longer willing to spend energy figuring out the difference. I moved into Ray's house that fall. It needed updating, but it had extraordinary bones. His words, now mine. I treated the renovation the same way I treated every project I had ever cared about. One section at a time, done properly, no shortcuts. I painted the rooms, replaced the kitchen faucet, refinished the floors Ray had installed himself 30 years before. The back deck he had built became my evening workspace, laptop open, coffee cooling beside me. The neighbors, Dale and his wife Connie, brought dinner the first week. By the second month, I'd met enough people in the surrounding 2 blocks to feel the specific warmth that comes from a neighborhood that has been a neighborhood for a long time. I joined a local business association. I started taking on a few additional clients. I planted things in the backyard that Ray had always meant to plant, and watched them come up the following spring with a feeling I did not have the vocabulary for except to call it belonging. I had not spoken to my parents or Amanda beyond a brief exchange at the funeral. Occasionally a text would appear from my mother, a forwarded inspirational quote, a birthday acknowledgement, and I would respond with something brief and neutral. I was not angry, I was just done. What I did not expect was how precisely they would time their return. The first message came on a Tuesday. An email from Amanda with the subject line, "Checking in." The tone was warm in a deliberate way, the kind of warmth that is assembled rather than felt. She wrote that she had been thinking about me, that she had seen a photo of the house Ray left me on a local community Facebook group, and it looked like I was doing incredible things with it. She said that she and our parents had been going through some challenges and that she hoped we could reconnect. I read the email twice. Then I showed it to my friend Diane, who I had met through the business association and who had an uncanny ability to identify the architecture beneath a sentence. "Someone wants something," she said without looking up from the email. I did not respond that day. 3 days later, my mother called. I answered because some part of me has always been more optimistic than the evidence warrants. "Lauren, honey?" Her voice was the warmest I had heard it in years. "It is so good to hear your voice. I have been thinking about us so much lately. About how time passes and how family is the most important thing. I want to make things right between us." I asked how they were doing. "Fine," she said, a beat too quickly. "We have had some adjustments. Your father's company restructured and he took an early retirement package. Amanda is in between things right now. We had to move out of the house. We are in a 2-bedroom apartment and it is..." She paused. "It is an adjustment." There it was. The scaffold under the warmth. I told her I was sorry to hear that and kept my voice genuinely even because I was sorry. Not for them specifically, but for the fact that hardship is genuinely hard even when it comes for people who deserve consequences. I did not commit to anything. I ended the call after 12 minutes and sat on the back deck for a long time. My father called the following Sunday. He was not warm the way my mother tried to be. He was direct in the way that had always been his style. Direct the way a wall is direct. Not because it is honest, but because it simply does not move for you. He said that the house Ray left me had 3 bedrooms, that I was one person, that Amanda needed a place to stabilize, that it was what Ray would have wanted, for family to use the property together. I told him that Ray had been very specific about what he wanted and that a lawyer had documented all of it. My father said that he and my mother needed a stable base while they sorted out their finances, that the apartment was too small, that family helped family, that I was not the only one who had suffered losses. I said I would think about it. I would not think about it. But I had learned from Ray that sometimes saying you will think about it is the kindest way to end a conversation that has nowhere productive to go. The visit they requested came 3 weeks later on a Saturday. I asked Diane to be there because I trusted her read-on rooms in a way I did not entirely trust my own when my family was involved. My father walked through the house with the measured gaze of someone assessing square footage. My mother touched surfaces in the kitchen with a familiarity that made my shoulders tighten. Amanda moved quietly, saying little, taking in every room with the careful attention of someone taking inventory. At lunch, my father laid it out with the bluntness that was at least honest. They wanted to move in. He and my mother would take the main bedroom. Amanda would take the second. I could keep the third since it was technically still my house. We could split utilities. I looked at him steadily. I told him no. This was my home, left to me specifically by Ray, who had known exactly what he was doing. I was sorry for their situation. I was not in a position to take in 3 adults. My mother said that Ray had always loved family, that he would never have wanted this house to sit mostly empty. It is not empty, I said. I live here. Amanda was looking at her phone. I noticed she had taken a photo of the backyard through the window. I noticed this and did not say anything. The visit ended poorly. My father left with a silence that communicated volumes. My mother cried in the driveway in a way designed to be seen. Amanda lingered, and as she passed me at the door said, quietly, "Lauren, you know how they are. Just give them a little time and they will come around to being reasonable." I thought about what she said for 2 days. Then I called Gerald Marsh and asked him to review every document related to the house. He confirmed what I already knew. The deed was in my name, clean and simple with no complications. I also called a locksmith and had the back door lock upgraded. And I installed a security camera system covering the front door, the back door, the driveway, and the side gate. Dale helped me run the wires on a Saturday afternoon while Connie brought lemonade. "I want you to be careful," Dale said when we were done. "Your uncle would want you to be careful." 3 weeks later, I left for a long weekend in Chicago. A college friend was getting married. I would be gone from Thursday evening to Sunday afternoon. I left Thursday after work. The drive was easy. The wedding was beautiful, and my friend cried at exactly the moment everyone expected her to and laughed immediately after, which felt like the truest version of her. I was happy in a clean, uncomplicated way that I had been slowly learning to access over the past 2 years. Saturday afternoon, between the ceremony and the reception, I had an hour in my hotel room. I was changing shoes when my phone buzzed with a notification from the security camera app. Motion detected. Back door. I opened the app. My father's car was in the driveway. The timestamp said 2014 p.m. I watched the footage in real time as my father used something to work the back door lock. It took him less than a minute, which told me he had tried this before or come prepared, and held it open for my mother and Amanda, both of whom carried bags and boxes inside. They were moving in, while I was 4 hours away at a wedding. I did not hesitate. I did not call them first. I called 911. I explained that my home in Columbus, Ohio was being broken into by 3 people I could identify, that I had live security footage of the break-in in progress, and that I was out of state. The dispatcher was calm and professional and told me officers would be dispatched immediately. I gave her Dale's number as a local contact and she said she would have an officer reach out to him. Then I called Diane. Then I called Gerald Marsh and left a message summarizing what I had just watched. Then I changed my shoes, went to the reception, danced with my friend at her wedding because she deserved a present human being at her table, and left at 9 p.m. to drive back to Columbus. I arrived home at 1:30 in the morning. A Columbus PD cruiser was still parked outside. 2 officers had remained after the initial call because, as Dale told me when I arrived, my father had refused to leave voluntarily and had argued that it was a family matter for 45 minutes until the officers made clear that the next step was handcuffs. They were sitting in their cars in the driveway when I pulled up. My father and his. My mother and Amanda together in Amanda's. They had been required to leave immediately with only what they had arrived with. The rest of their boxes were still inside, untouched by the officers, available for supervised retrieval at a later date. I spoke to the officers first. I showed them the deed on my phone. I showed them the security footage. I answered their questions clearly and completely. The older of the 2 officers, a woman who looked like she had heard every version of the story, wrote everything down without expression. Then my father got out of his car. He walked toward me with the authority that had always worked when I was young. The squared shoulders, the measured pace, the voice that assumed it would not be questioned. "Lauren, this has gone far enough. We need to talk about this like adults." I looked at him. For a moment I was aware of how much I had once needed him to see me. Actually see me. And how completely I had stopped needing that without noticing it had happened. "We are not talking tonight," I said. "Your attorney can contact my attorney. If you come onto this property again without my explicit written permission, I will pursue every legal option available to me, and based on tonight, there are quite a few." He started to say something. My mother was out of her car now, tears coming, the familiar performance beginning. "Lauren, how can you do this to your own family, the same way you told me to figure it out when I needed help and had nowhere to go?" I said. I said it without heat, without satisfaction, just as a statement of fact. Then I thanked the officers, went inside, and locked my door. The legal process that followed was less dramatic than the night itself, but more permanently satisfying. The footage of the break-in was clear. Gerald Marsh filed for a restraining order within 48 hours. The argument my father had apparently floated to the officers, that he had some implied right to family property, collapsed immediately upon any scrutiny because there was no legal basis for it whatsoever, and Gerald made sure that was documented in the clearest possible terms. My father and Amanda were cited for breaking and entering. Because it was a first offense and they had ultimately left under police instruction, they avoided jail time, but the criminal record attached itself to the event in ways that my father, who had always been particular about his reputation, would have to carry. My mother was not cited directly, but she had entered the property knowing it was unauthorized, and that fact was part of the record. The restraining order was granted and made permanent 3 months later when text messages retrieved during the legal process from Amanda to my mother, sent in the weeks before the break-in, made it clear the plan had been discussed and coordinated deliberately. Amanda had written, "Once she is in Chicago, we have the whole weekend before she's back." The timestamps matched the camera footage exactly. I received a letter from my mother 6 weeks after the court date. It was handwritten, which I had not expected. She wrote that she did not expect me to forgive her and that she was not writing to ask for that. She wrote that, watching the police remove her from her brother's house, she called it that, her brother's house, not my house, which felt like the first honest thing she had said in years, made her understand something about what she had asked me to accept my whole life. She wrote that she was separating from my father, that she was in therapy, that she was not writing to rebuild anything, just to tell me that she knew. I read it twice. I put it in the drawer. I did not write back that week or the week after. Eventually, I wrote 3 sentences. I acknowledged that I received it. I said that I hoped she found steadiness. I said that any relationship between us in the future would need to be built slowly and only if it was honest. I sealed it and mailed it and felt neither relief nor regret. Just a kind of quiet that I recognized as mine. Diane came over that Saturday. We sat on the back deck with the string lights Ray had installed that I had never taken down, and she said, without preamble, "How are you actually?" I thought about it for a real moment. "Okay," I said. Actually okay. Not I am fine okay. Actually okay. Not I am fine okay. Actually okay. She nodded like that was the correct answer. My relationship with Diane had deepened through the events of that year in ways that only trouble can deepen a friendship. She had shown up without being asked. She had not offered opinions I did not request. She had brought food on the nights when the legal process felt heaviest and listened without trying to solve anything I was not asking her to solve. 6 months after the restraining order was finalized, I made a decision I had been turning over quietly for longer than I realized. I put a portion of what I had saved into a small housing fund through the local community foundation. The fund was designated for young adults who had been financially cut off by their families and were navigating the gap between a crisis and stability. The specific gap that no safety net addresses cleanly, because it requires both a roof and someone who believes you can get to the other side of it. I named it for Ray. Not the full name of the fund that belonged to the foundation, but in the internal documentation and in the letter I sent to Gerald when I formalized it, I wrote that this was for him, for the way he had left the light on. The first person I helped through the fund was a 23-year-old named Priya, who was a UX design student. I did not go looking for symmetry, it simply arrived, whose parents had stopped supporting her when she transferred out of pre-med. She was couch surfing when a social worker connected her to the fund. I covered 2 months of a room in a shared house and connected her with 3 contacts in the Columbus tech community who had agreed to review portfolios. Watching her send me a message 4 months later that said I got the internship felt like something I do not have the right words for. Not pride exactly. Something older and quieter than pride. On an evening in late October, almost exactly 2 years after I had moved into Ray's house, I sat on the back deck in the last of the fall warmth and looked at the yard he had built, and the garden I had extended, and the lights strung overhead and the neighborhood visible through the gap in the fence where Dale and Connie's garden met mine. I thought about what my father had said on that last visit, standing in my kitchen like he was already measuring the walls. You have never contributed anything to this family. This house belongs to all of us. I thought about the first time I had come to this house as a child, maybe 9 years old, sitting on this same deck while Ray taught me to identify which wood was load-bearing and which was decorative and why it mattered to know the difference. The house belongs to you, he had said on a different evening years later. I mean that, every part of it. You earned it before I was ever in a position to give it. I had not understood what he meant at the time. I understood it now. Some families are given to you. Some families are given to you. Some families are built. The ones you build know what they cost and they hold together because of that, not in spite of it. The people who tried to take this house from me did not understand that. They thought it was property. They thought it was square footage and a deed and space they could step into and call theirs because of blood and entitlement and the long habit of taking from me and calling it family. But the house was never just the house. It was every evening I had sat with Ray and learned to build things that lasted. It was Diane at my door without being asked. It was Dale running camera wire on a Saturday. It was Priya's message that said I got the internship. It was the fund with Ray's name attached, and the first light on the first morning I woke up, and a home that no one could claim was theirs because I had protected it. I had dialed those 3 numbers, and it was the clearest thing I had ever done. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted them gone more than I wanted them to be different, but because I finally understood what Ray had been teaching me my whole life, with his hands in the wood and his voice even and steady on the porch in the summer dark. Own your work. Own your space. Let no one else's name be on what you built. If any of this sounds familiar to you, if you have ever had someone try to take what you created and call it theirs because of who they are to you rather than what they have done for you, I want you to know that you are allowed to protect what is yours. Not someday. Not after one more conversation or one more chance or one more year of hoping they become the family they were supposed to be. Now. You do not have to be loud about it, you just have to be certain. I was certain. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. If this story moved you, please give it a like and subscribe to Steal Revenge for more. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping what you built? I want to know.